The dusty winds of 1874 whispered across the sun-scorched plains of Texas as Clarissa Montgomery slipped through the wooden fence, her heart pounding with the thrill of trespassing. The fruit hanging heavy on the trees before her glistened like jewels in the late afternoon sun, promising sweetness her parched lips hadn't tasted in months. Clarissa hadn't eaten a proper meal in 3 days. The journey west had depleted her meager savings, and pride prevented her from begging. Her dress, once a respectable shade of blue, had faded to a tired gray that matched the exhaustion in her eyes. At 22, she had already endured more hardship than most women twice her age. The peach she plucked from the lowest branch was warm from the sun, its fuzzy skin tickling her palm. Juice trickled down her chin with the first bite, and she closed her eyes in momentary bliss. The second peach was even sweeter than the first. By the third, she had forgotten caution, forgotten that this bounty belonged to someone else. "Madam, I believe those are my peaches you're enjoying." The deep voice startled Clarissa so badly she nearly choked. Spinning around, she found herself face to face with a tall man whose shadow stretched long across the orchard floor. His hat was pulled low, obscuring his features, but there was no mistaking the amused quirk of his lips or the confident stance of a man on his own property. I'm sorry," she stammered, the half-eaten peach still clutched in her trembling hand. "I haven't eaten and I thought—" "You thought you'd help yourself to my harvest?" He stepped closer, and Clarissa braced herself for anger. Instead, he removed his hat, revealing eyes the color of the Texas sky and a face weathered by sun and wind. "If you're hungry, there are better ways to ask for food than stealing." "I don't steal," Clarissa replied, straightening her shoulders despite the evidence literally in her hand. "At least, I never have before today." The man studied her for a long moment. "Name's Yates. Yates Crawford. This is my orchard, my land, and those are definitely my peaches." "Clarissa Montgomery," she responded automatically, then wished she hadn't given her real name to a man who could have her arrested for theft. Yates Crawford glanced at the setting sun, then back at the young woman standing among his trees. There was a quiet dignity about her despite her disheveled appearance and the obvious hunger that had driven her to steal. "Well, Miss Montgomery, seeing as you've already sampled the merchandise, you might as well come up to the house and have a proper meal. Can't have you fainting from hunger in my orchard. Bad for business." Clarissa hesitated, weighing her options. Pride told her to refuse, to walk away and face the growing darkness with an empty stomach. Common sense reminded her that she had nowhere to go and no money for food. "I can work," she offered, "to pay for the peaches and the meal." A smile spread across Yates's face, transforming his stern features. "I reckon we can come to an arrangement. Follow me." The Crawford homestead was larger than Clarissa had expected. The main house stood solid and well-maintained, with a wide porch and windows that caught the last golden rays of sunlight. A barn and several outbuildings clustered nearby, and beyond them stretched fields and pastures where cattle grazed. Mrs. Abigail Turner, the housekeeper, greeted them with raised eyebrows when Yates explained the situation. The older woman's lips pressed into a thin line, but she set an extra plate at the table without comment. "Girl needs feeding up," she muttered, ladling stew into a bowl and placing it before Clarissa along with a thick slice of bread. Skinny as a fence post, Clarissa ate slowly, fighting the urge to gulp down the food. It was the first hot meal she'd had since leaving St. Louis, and each bite reminded her how far she'd come and how uncertain her future remained. "What brings you to Willow Creek?" Yates asked when she'd eaten enough to take the edge off her hunger. "I'm heading to California," Clarissa replied. "My uncle has a business there. He wrote that I could find work as a schoolteacher." "California's still a fair distance," Yates observed, "and not an easy journey for a woman alone." Clarissa lifted her chin. I've managed so far. And ended up stealing peaches in my orchard, he reminded her, though there was no malice in his tone. Mrs. Turner snorted as she cleared the dishes. Girl needs work and a place to stay before she continues. Train to El Paso won't be through for another 2 weeks. Yates nodded thoughtfully. I could use help with the orchard. Harvest season's coming, and I'm short-handed. The cabin by the south pasture is empty since Johnson moved on. I don't know anything about orchards, Clarissa admitted. But you know about peaches, Yates replied with a wink. And I reckon you're a quick learner. The pay's fair, and you'll have a roof over your head until you decide to move on. Clarissa considered the offer. She had planned to find temporary work in town, but the prospect of a private cabin and steady employment was tempting. And there was something about Yates Crawford, a steadiness, a sense of quiet strength that made her trust him despite their unconventional meeting. Thank you, Mr. Crawford. I accept. The cabin was small but clean, with a bed, table, 2 chairs, and a small stove. Mrs. Turner had supplied it with basic necessities: linens, towels, a kettle, and a lantern. It's not much, Yates said as he lit the lantern, but it's dry and sound. No one will bother you here. It's perfect, Clarissa replied, meaning it. After weeks of traveling, sleeping in crowded boarding houses when she could afford them and outdoors when she couldn't, the simple cabin felt like luxury. Rest tonight, he told her. Tomorrow I'll show you what needs doing. When Yates left, Clarissa sat on the edge of the bed, scarcely able to believe her change in fortune. She had begun the day hungry and hopeless, a thief in a stranger's orchard. She would end it with a full stomach, a job, and a roof over her head. Perhaps her luck was finally changing. Morning arrived with a gentle knock at her door. Clarissa, who had slept more soundly than she had in weeks, opened it to find Mrs. Turner with a basket containing bread, preserves, and a pot of coffee. Mr. Crawford says to meet him at the orchard when you're ready, the housekeeper said. Don't rush. Eat first. Clarissa thanked her and sat down to enjoy the simple breakfast. Through the window, she could see the orchard stretching in neat rows, the trees heavy with fruit. Beyond, cattle grazed in green pastures, and further still, the wild plains rolled away toward distant mountains. It was beautiful in a rugged way, unlike anything she had known in Missouri. Yates was examining a tree when she approached the orchard, his back to her. The morning sun highlighted the broad set of his shoulders and the way his hair curled slightly at the nape of his neck. He turned at the sound of her footsteps, and Clarissa was struck again by the vivid blue of his eyes. Good morning, Miss Montgomery. Ready to learn about peach farming? The next days fell into a rhythm. Yates showed her how to test the fruit for ripeness, how to harvest without bruising, and how to sort and pack for market. He was patient but demanding, expecting her best effort and not accepting less. Clarissa worked hard, determined to prove her worth. In the evenings, she often joined Yates and Mrs. Turner for dinner at the main house. Yates told stories of his years building the ranch, of cattle drives and droughts, of the railroad's arrival that had made shipping fruit to eastern markets possible. Clarissa found herself laughing more than she had in years. A week passed, then 2. Clarissa's hands grew calloused, her arms stronger, her skin tanned by the Texas sun. She learned the names of the ranch hands and the rhythms of the land. She discovered that Yates had inherited the property from his father but had been the one to plant the orchard, seeing potential where others saw only cattle grazing land. My father thought I was crazy, he told her one evening as they walked through the orchard after dinner. Said nothing would grow here but grass and thistles. Took 5 years before these trees produced enough to sell, but I was stubborn. It's beautiful, Clarissa said. You must be proud. Yates glanced at her, his expression softening. I am. This land has been good to me. Hard sometimes, but good. There was something in his voice that made Clarissa's heart quicken. She looked away, suddenly conscious of how close they were standing, of the fading light and the sweet scent of ripening peaches. "I should get back to the cabin," she said. "Early start tomorrow." Yates nodded, but she felt his gaze follow her as she walked away. The next day brought a storm. Thunder rolled across the plains, and rain pelted the orchard, turning the dirt paths to mud. Clarissa stayed in her cabin, using the unexpected time to mend her clothes and write a letter to her uncle explaining her delayed arrival. A knock came mid-afternoon. She opened the door to find Yates, rain dripping from his hat and coat. "Thought you might be getting cabin fever," he said, holding up a book. "Brought you something to read." Clarissa invited him in, suddenly conscious of the cabin's small space and her own disheveled appearance. Yates removed his wet coat and hat, hanging them by the door. The book was a volume of poetry by Walt Whitman. "I didn't take you for a poetry reader, Mr. Crawford," she said, examining the well-worn cover. "There's a lot you don't know about me yet, Miss Montgomery." He sat at her small table, his presence filling the cabin. "And please call me Yates. Mr. Crawford makes me feel like my father." "Then you must call me Clarissa," she replied, sitting across from him. They talked for hours as the storm raged outside. Yates spoke of his time at university back east before returning to Texas to help his ailing father. Clarissa told him about growing up in St. Louis, losing her parents to influenza, and her decision to seek a new start in California. "Why teaching?" he asked. "I've always loved learning," she explained, "and there aren't many respectable professions open to women. I don't have the temperament for nursing." "You're good with the orchard," Yates observed. "You have a feel for growing things. Is that a job offer, Mr. Yates?" He smiled, a slow, thoughtful smile that made Clarissa's breath catch. "Maybe it is." The rain finally subsided as evening approached. Yates stood to leave, retrieving his still damp coat. "Thank you for the company," Clarissa said, walking him to the door. "And the book." "My pleasure." He paused at the threshold, looking down at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. For a breathless moment, she thought he might kiss her. Instead, he placed his hat on his head and stepped outside. "Good night, Clarissa." That night, Clarissa lay awake long after she should have been sleeping, thinking about Yates Crawford and the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled, about his calloused hands and gentle manner, about the life he had built in this wild place. She had come to Texas as a stopping point on her journey west. Now, she wasn't sure she wanted to continue. The following days brought clear skies and renewed activity in the orchard. The first major harvest would begin soon, and there was much to prepare. Wagons needed repairing, crates required assembly, and buyers in distant cities awaited confirmation of delivery dates. Yates rode into town to arrange shipping on the railroad, leaving Clarissa to oversee the final preparations. When he returned 3 days later, there was a tension in his manner that hadn't been there before. "Is everything all right?" she asked as they walked through the orchard checking the trees. "Just some trouble brewing," he replied. "Nothing for you to worry about." But Clarissa could see the concern in his eyes. That evening at dinner, she overheard him talking with 2 of his ranch hands about increasing night patrols and watching for strangers. Later, when they were alone on the porch, she confronted him. "What's really happening, Yates? I deserve to know if there's danger." He sighed, leaning against the porch railing. "There's a group calling themselves the Red River Raiders. They've been hitting farms and ranches north of here, stealing livestock, burning barns. Word in town is they're moving this way." "Outlaws?" Clarissa asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "Of a sort. Men who lost everything in the war and turned bitter. They target successful operations, especially those shipping east." He looked toward the orchard, his expression grim. Like mine. What will you do? Protect what's mine, he said simply. I've sent for some extra hands from neighboring ranches. We'll increase patrols, keep watch. The sheriff's forming a posse, but his jurisdiction only covers the town. Clarissa thought of the peaceful weeks she had spent at the ranch, of the home Yates had built, of the trees he had nurtured from saplings. The idea of it all being destroyed by vengeful men made her heart ache. I want to help, she said firmly. Yates turned to her, surprise evident on his face. This isn't your fight, Clarissa. You gave me a job when I needed one, a place to stay when I had nowhere to go. She stepped closer, holding his gaze. You didn't turn me away when you found me stealing your peaches. Let me help protect your home. Something shifted in Yates's expression, a softening, a warming that made Clarissa's heart beat faster. You're a remarkable woman, Clarissa Montgomery, he said quietly. The moments stretched between them, filled with unspoken words and growing feelings. This time, when Yates leaned toward her, Clarissa didn't pull away. His lips met hers in a gentle kiss that quickly deepened, his arms drawing her close. Clarissa felt as though she were falling and flying at the same time, lost in the warmth of his embrace and the unexpected rightness of being in his arms. When they finally parted, both breathless, Yates rested his forehead against hers. I've been wanting to do that since I found you in my orchard, he admitted. Clarissa laughed softly. Even when you thought I was a thief? Especially then. You looked so fierce and proud, even with peach juice on your chin. The days that followed were filled with both joy and tension. Clarissa and Yates stole moments together between preparations, a touch of hands while inspecting fruit, a quick kiss in the shadow of the barn, quiet conversations as they walked through the orchard at dusk. Each day deepened Clarissa's feelings for this strong, gentle man and the land he loved. But the threat of the Red River Raiders hung over them. More reports came from neighboring properties, a barn burned 10 miles north, cattle stolen from a ranch to the east. Yates grew more vigilant, sending his most trusted hands to patrol the boundaries of his land. The harvest began despite the looming danger. The orchard came alive with workers carefully picking the ripest peaches, filling crates that would be loaded onto wagons and taken to the railroad. Clarissa worked alongside them, her hair tied back with a kerchief, her hands swift and sure. Yates found her at midday, taking a brief rest under the shade of a particularly old and gnarled peach tree at the orchard's edge. You're a natural, he said, sitting beside her on the grass. Johnson never sorted the fruit half as well, and he worked here 3 seasons. Clarissa smiled, pleased by the compliment. I like the work. There's something satisfying about seeing the crates fill up, knowing these will travel to places I've never been. Yates was quiet for a moment, plucking a blade of grass and twirling it between his fingers. You could still go to California, he said finally. The train comes through next week. Your uncle is expecting you. Clarissa looked at him sharply. Are you asking me to leave? No. He met her gaze, his eyes serious. I'm asking you to stay. Permanently. Her heart seemed to stop, then race forward. Yates, I know it's sudden, he continued quickly. We've only known each other a short while. But I've never felt this way about anyone, Clarissa. This place my home, it was never complete until you arrived. He took her hand, his calloused fingers gentle against her skin. I'm not asking you to give up your dreams. If you still want to teach, there's a school in town that needs a teacher. Or you could help me run the orchard. Or both. I just know I want you in my life, every day. Not just until the next train comes through. Clarissa felt tears prick her eyes. Are you proposing, Yates Crawford? He smiled. That slow, warm smile that never failed to make her heart skip. I believe I am, Miss Montgomery. Not very eloquently, perhaps, but with absolute sincerity. Before she could answer, A shout came from the direction of the house. One of the ranch hands was riding hard toward them, waving his arm urgently. "Mr. Crawford, riders coming from the north. At least a dozen men, moving fast." The peaceful moment shattered. Yates was on his feet instantly, his expression transforming from tender to alert. "Get everyone to the house," he ordered. "Women and children in the cellar. Men with guns to the upper windows and porch." The ranch hand nodded and galloped away to spread the word. Yates turned to Clarissa, his face grim. "Go to the house," he said. "Stay with Mrs. Turner in the cellar until it's safe." Clarissa stood, brushing grass from her skirt. "And leave you to face them alone? I don't think so." "Clarissa—" "I can shoot," she interrupted. "My father taught me. And I'm not hiding in a cellar while you risk your life." For a moment she thought he would argue. Instead, he cupped her face in his hands and kissed her fiercely. "You are the most stubborn, infuriating, wonderful woman I have ever met," he said when they parted. "If we survive this, I'm going to marry you." "When we survive this," Clarissa corrected, "I'm going to hold you to that." They ran together toward the house, where the ranch hands were already gathering. Yates issued swift, clear orders, positioning men around the property. Mrs. Turner, face pale but determined, distributed ammunition and bandages. "Cellars ready for the women and children," she told Yates. "But I'm staying up here. Might be old, but I can still shoot straight." Yates knew better than to argue. He assigned her to watch the back of the house, then handed Clarissa a Winchester rifle. "Stay by the front window," he instructed. "Don't shoot unless they open fire first. These men are dangerous, but I'd rather avoid bloodshed if possible." Clarissa nodded, checking the rifle with practiced hands. Her heart was pounding, but her fingers were steady. She took her position by the window, scanning the northern approach. The riders appeared on the horizon within minutes, a dust cloud rising behind them as they galloped toward the ranch. Clarissa counted 14 men, all armed, their faces grim beneath the brims of their hats. Yates stepped onto the porch as they approached, his own rifle held casually but ready. The riders slowed, spreading out in a half-circle before the house. Their leader, a tall man with a scar running down one cheek, urged his horse forward. "Crawford," he called, "heard you've got a nice operation here. Shipping peaches east for fancy prices while folks around here can barely feed their families." "My fruit feeds plenty of families, Shaw," Yates replied, his voice carrying across the yard, "including the ones of the men who work for me. I don't want trouble." Shaw laughed, a harsh sound without humor. "Should have thought of that before you got so prosperous on land that should have gone to returning soldiers. My father bought this land legally 40 years ago," Yates said evenly. "And I served same as you. Difference is, I came home and built something instead of turning outlaw." The words struck a nerve. Shaw's face darkened with anger. "You've got one chance, Crawford. Hand over your cash, your best horses, and whatever valuables you've got stashed away. We'll leave the buildings standing if you cooperate." From her position at the window, Clarissa could see Yates's shoulders tense, though his voice remained calm. "Can't do that, Shaw. I suggest you and your men ride on before this gets ugly. Sheriff's got a posse heading this way." It was a bluff. The sheriff wouldn't arrive for hours yet, but it gave Shaw pause. He scanned the windows of the house, noting the rifle barrels visible at several openings. "How many men you got in there, Crawford?" he asked. "Enough," Yates replied. "More than you'd want to face in a fair fight." For a tense moment it seemed Shaw might back down. Then one of his men, impatient or nervous, fired a shot. The bullet splintered the wood of the porch railing inches from Yates's hand. The yard erupted in gunfire. Yates dove for cover as Shaw's men opened fire on the house. From inside, Yates's ranch hands returned fire, forcing the raiders to scatter and seek shelter behind wagons and water troughs. Clarissa aimed carefully, remembering her father's lessons. Her first shot struck a raider's horse, sending the animal rearing and the rider tumbling to the ground. Her second caught a man in the shoulder as he tried to flank the house. The exchange continued for what felt like hours but was likely only minutes. The air filled with gun smoke and the acrid smell of powder. Through it all, Clarissa kept her focus, reloading and firing with a steadiness that surprised even herself. A cry from the porch drew her attention. Yates had been hit, a red stain spreading across his left sleeve. Ignoring the danger, Clarissa ran to him, helping him inside as bullets whizzed past. "It's just a graze," he insisted as she examined the wound. "I'm fine." "You're bleeding," she countered, tearing a strip from her petticoat to bind the injury. "Hold still." Outside, the gunfire was slowing. Several of Shaw's men had fallen, and others were retreating to a safer distance. Shaw himself shouted orders, trying to rally his remaining forces. Mrs. Turner appeared with a shotgun in her hands. "They're trying to get to the barn," she reported, likely aiming to set it afire. Yates grimaced as Clarissa tightened the makeshift bandage. "We need to push them back before they burn us out." A commotion from the north drew everyone's attention. A new group of riders was approaching fast, not raiders, but a posse of at least 20 men led by the town sheriff. "Looks like your bluff wasn't so far off after all," Clarissa said with relief. Shaw and his remaining men saw the reinforcements and realized their position was untenable. With a shout of frustration, Shaw ordered a retreat. The raiders galloped away, leaving their wounded behind. The sheriff's posse arrived as the dust from the retreating outlaws was still settling. Sheriff Morgan, a barrel-chested man with a gray-streaked beard, dismounted with a grunt. "Heard there might be trouble," he said to Yates. "Gathered every man I could find. Looks like we were almost too late." "Your timing was perfect," Yates replied, stepping onto the porch with Clarissa at his side. "Shaw and his boys got more than they bargained for, but they might have worn us down eventually." The aftermath of the attack kept everyone busy. The wounded raiders were treated and taken into custody. The dead 3 of Shaw's men were loaded onto a wagon for burial in town. Miraculously, none of Yates's people had been killed, though several had minor injuries. As twilight fell, Clarissa found Yates sitting alone on the porch steps, staring out at the orchard. She sat beside him, taking his hand in hers. "Are you all right?" she asked softly. He nodded, squeezing her fingers. "Just thinking about how close we came to losing everything. If Shaw had torched the orchard." "But he didn't," Clarissa reminded him. "Your home is safe. Your trees are still standing." Yates turned to look at her, his eyes reflecting the fading light. "I meant what I said before the attack, Clarissa. I want you to stay, to be my wife." Clarissa felt a smile bloom across her face. "And I meant what I said. When we survived, I was going to hold you to that proposal." He laughed, pulling her close. "Is that a yes?" "Yes," she whispered against his lips. "Yes, Yates Crawford, I will marry you." Their kiss was interrupted by cheers from the ranch hands who had gathered nearby. Mrs. Turner stood in the doorway, wiping tears from her eyes with her apron. "About time," the housekeeper declared. "Been watching you 2 moon over each other for weeks." The harvest resumed the next day. With the threat of the raiders gone, Shaw had been captured by a neighboring posse, and his gang scattered. The mood was jubilant. News of Yates and Clarissa's engagement spread quickly, bringing congratulations from workers and neighbors alike. They were married 2 weeks later in the town church, a simple ceremony attended by everyone from the ranch and many from the surrounding area. Clarissa wore a dress of pale blue silk that Mrs. Turner had helped her make, with peach blossoms in her hair. Yates couldn't take his eyes off her as she walked down the aisle to meet him. "Never thought stealing peaches would lead to this," he whispered as they exchanged vows. Clarissa's uncle arrived from California for the wedding, surprised but delighted by the turn of events. He brought news that the teaching position was still available if she wanted it, but Clarissa had already made her decision. "My home is here now," she told him, "with Yates and the orchard." The uncle stayed for a week, getting to know his new nephew-in-law and exploring the growing town of Willow Creek. Before he left, he made them promise to visit California the following year. "Bring some of those famous peaches," he said with a wink. "We'll see if they're as good as you claim." Fall gave way to winter, and the orchard entered its dormant season. Clarissa and Yates settled into married life with a joy that surprised them both in its completeness. They expanded the main house, adding rooms for the family they hoped to have. Clarissa started a small school for the children of the ranch workers, teaching reading and arithmetic in the afternoons. In the evenings, they would often walk through the orchard, planning for the next season's planting and harvest. Yates taught Clarissa about grafting and pruning, about the soil and the weather patterns that affected their trees. She absorbed it all eagerly, her natural intelligence and curiosity making her a quick study. "My father would have liked you," Yates told her one evening as they watched the sunset from their favorite spot beneath the old peach tree. "He always said a man needed a woman who could challenge him, not just comfort him." Clarissa laughed. "And do I challenge you, Mr. Crawford?" "Every day, Mrs. Crawford." He pulled her close, breathing in the scent of her hair. "And I wouldn't have it any other way." Spring arrived with a riot of blossoms, turning the orchard into a sea of pink and white. Clarissa, who had never seen the trees in bloom, was enchanted. She spent hours among them, sketching the blossoms and planning a garden near the house. It was during this time that she realized she was expecting their first child. She told Yates one evening as they sat on the porch swing, watching fireflies rise from the grass. The joy that spread across his face was something Clarissa knew she would remember for the rest of her life. He lifted her in his arms, spinning her around before setting her gently back on her feet. "A baby," he said in wonder, placing his hand on her still flat stomach. "Our child. Due in winter," Clarissa confirmed. "Mrs. Turner already suspects. She's been making me drink ginger tea every morning." Yates laughed. "That woman doesn't miss anything. She'll be a godsend when the baby comes." The news of the pregnancy spread quickly through the ranch. Workers touched their hats to Clarissa with new respect, and Mrs. Turner took it upon herself to ensure the expectant mother ate properly and rested enough. "No more climbing ladders in the orchard," the housekeeper decreed. "You can sort and pack, but leave the picking to others." Clarissa complied, though she missed the active work. Instead, she focused on her small school, now expanded to include adult education in the evenings. Several of the ranch hands were learning to read and write under her guidance, proud of their new skills. Summer brought another successful harvest, the trees heavy with fruit that commanded good prices at market. Yates expanded their shipping routes, sending peaches as far east as Chicago. The profits allowed them to hire more permanent workers and improve the living conditions for everyone on the ranch. Clarissa's pregnancy progressed smoothly, her body changing as the baby grew. Yates was attentive and protective, sometimes excessively so in Clarissa's opinion. "I'm with child, not made of glass," she reminded him when he tried to prevent her from helping with the canning. "Can't blame a man for wanting to take care of his wife and unborn child," he replied, though he did relent and allow her to oversee the preserving of peaches for winter. As her due date approached, Clarissa prepared the nursery with Mrs. Turner's help. They painted the walls a soft yellow and hung curtains that Clarissa had embroidered with tiny peach blossoms. Yates built a cradle from the wood of a peach tree that had been damaged in a storm, polishing it until it gleamed. The baby arrived on a cold December night during a rare Texas snowfall. After hours of labor with Mrs. Turner acting as midwife and Yates pacing anxiously outside the bedroom door, Clarissa gave birth to a daughter with a tuft of dark hair and eyes the color of Texas bluebonnets. "She's perfect," Yates whispered when he was finally allowed to enter the room. He sat beside Clarissa on the bed, marveling at the tiny fingers and perfect features of their daughter. "What shall we name her?" Clarissa asked, exhausted but radiant. Yates thought for a moment. "How about Georgia, after the Peach State?" Clarissa smiled. "Georgia Crawford. I like it. Georgia Rose Crawford." "Rose for your mother," Yates nodded, remembering the stories Clarissa had told of her childhood. "It's perfect." Georgia thrived, growing strong and healthy through the winter months. By spring, she was smiling and cooing, charming everyone on the ranch. Clarissa would often carry her in a sling as she went about her daily tasks, showing her the awakening orchard and the new calves in the pasture. "She'll be a country girl through and through," Yates observed one evening as they sat on the porch, Georgia sleeping peacefully in Clarissa's arms. "Knowing the rhythm of the seasons before she can walk." "Just like her father," Clarissa replied, leaning against his shoulder. "Though I hope she inherits your patience rather than my stubbornness." Yates laughed. "Your stubbornness has served us well. Without it, you might have given up and continued to California instead of staying to help protect the ranch." "I couldn't leave," Clarissa admitted. "Not after I fell in love with you, and with this place." As Georgia grew from infant to toddler, the Crawford orchard continued to prosper. Yates expanded their holdings, purchasing adjacent land and planting new varieties of fruit trees. Clarissa's small school became an official town school, though she continued to teach only part-time, balancing education with her roles as mother and orchard manager. 3 years after Georgia's birth, Clarissa gave birth to twins, a boy they named Samuel after Yates's father, and another girl they called Elizabeth for Clarissa's aunt who had raised her after her parents' deaths. The Crawford family was complete, their home filled with the laughter and energy of 3 active children. Through the years, Clarissa never forgot the desperate hunger that had driven her to steal peaches from a stranger's orchard. Each harvest season, she set aside a portion of their crop for those in need, establishing a tradition of charity that became known throughout the county. "No one should go hungry when our trees are so abundant," she would say when Yates teased her about her generosity. "Just making sure no one else steals my peaches," he would reply with a wink. "Worked out pretty well the first time, but I'm not taking any chances." The story of how they met became family legend, told and retold to their children and eventually to their grandchildren. How Clarissa, alone and hungry, had helped herself to peaches from a stranger's orchard. How Yates had caught her in the act but offered a meal and work instead of punishment. How love had grown between them amid the challenges of frontier life. On their 25th wedding anniversary, Yates surprised Clarissa with a gift, a gold pendant in the shape of a peach, with tiny diamonds like dewdrops on its surface. "To remind you of where we began," he said as he fastened it around her neck, "and how far we've come." Clarissa touched the pendant, tears in her eyes. "As if I could ever forget. That orchard changed my life." "No," Yates corrected gently. "You changed your life. The orchard was just the setting." They stood together on the porch of the home they had built, looking out over the orchard that had grown and matured alongside their love. Their children were grown now, Georgia married to a local rancher, the twins pursuing education back east but always returning home for harvest season. "Do you ever regret not continuing to California?" Yates asked, a question he hadn't posed in many years. Clarissa shook her head. her hand finding his as naturally as breathing. Not for a single moment. Everything I needed was right here. A home. A purpose. She smiled up at him, the years having only deepened her love. And a stubborn orchard owner who saw something worth saving in a hungry peach thief. Best decision I ever made, Yates replied, drawing her close. Though I think you had me from that first defiant look, standing there with juice on your chin and fire in your eyes. And you had me with your kindness, Clarissa said softly, offering food instead of judgment. As the sun set over the Crawford orchard, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink that rivaled their ripest peaches, Yates and Clarissa remained on the porch, wrapped in the quiet contentment of a love that had begun with stolen fruit and grown into a lifetime of shared dreams. The orchard continued to flourish through the seasons, a living testament to what could grow from the most unlikely beginnings. And every harvest, as the first peaches ripened under the Texas sun, Clarissa would pick one and share it with Yates, a private celebration of the day a hungry young woman found not just food, but a future among the peach trees of Willow Creek.